one housekeeping announcement. The governor is going to give his remarks, then he will take questions. We ask that only members of the working media and dues-paying members of Press Club ask questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Happy New Year to you. I want to express my appreciation for the opportunity to be back with you all today to start the year. I want to report to you that Don and I had a great Christmas, and we're looking forward to wonderful things in 2019. I hope all of you had a joyous Christmas and share my enthusiasm, my optimism for our state in this new year. Before I get started, I do want to introduce Christina Stevens. She is the new Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications. For those of you who may not know Christina, because I figured when I come to the Press Club on her first day of work, it's a good thing to make sure you know who she is. The outlook for this year is promising. And it's promising because of the foundation for success that we've established over the last several years, but particularly last year. And as a result of that, I continue to be extremely optimistic and bullish. It sounds like
Sorry about that.
okay, is that any better?
The sound is out.
All right, so
The sound is out. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
It's a Republican mic.
Way to go, way to go. Lose his fuse, maybe. One, two, three. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry, but the podium seems to have gone out or blown the fuse or something, so I'm going to ask the governor to talk loudly, but fortunately the media microphones are here and we'll be able to pick them up. Governor, very sorry about that. I'll see if I can finish.
no problem. Thank you. Speaking out loudly is not usually a problem for us. But if you can't hear me in the back room, raise your hands and get my attention. I'll try to speak a little louder.
We can't hear you back here.
Well, as I was saying, I am extremely bullish on the future of Louisiana. I am optimistic because of the foundation for success that we've laid over the last few years, but particularly last year when we were able to stabilize our budget for the long term, thanks to a bipartisan compromise plan that we passed last summer, and we turned deficits into surplus, and at the same time we've been able to provide the people of Louisiana a net tax reduction from last year to this year, right at $600 million. In 2018, we reached the lowest unemployment rate we've seen in a decade, and Louisiana's employment currently is at a near record high with well over 2 million individuals employed in our state. Since the beginning of 2016, we've attracted 113 major economic development projects. These projects are producing $30.7 billion worth of new capital investment in Louisiana, and collectively they're resulting in 27,500 new jobs while retaining more than 19,000 existing jobs across the state of Louisiana. According to the latest report from the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis, Louisiana's economy grew at a rate of 4.3% in the second quarter of 2018. It outpaced the national average, and 12 other states in the southeastern region of our country. In fact, the economy measured by GDP is at an all-time high in Louisiana currently at $250 billion. Our economy has never been stronger, bigger, more robust than it is right now. Additionally, because of the work that we've done, the percentage of people in the state of Louisiana who are uninsured has been cut in half since I became governor, down from almost 1 in 4 to right at 1 in 10 because of the Medicaid expansion. The number of people incarcerated has been reduced, and we are no longer the nation's #1 incarcerator. And that's the first time in decades a governor of our state's been able to say that. And we're not only saving money, we're promoting public safety in what we are doing, and we are reinvesting those savings into critical programs to reduce recidivism by promoting education, training, but also mental health and substance abuse treatment. At the same time, higher education has been funded without a reduction for the second time in a row, and for only the second time in 10 years. We fully met our obligations to all of our students on top, and need-based aid for higher education through the Go Grant program is being funded currently at the highest amount ever. So these are the types of things that I believe have positioned us for even greater success as we move forward. And I want to discuss some of the goals for this year. As you probably know, I've already announced that my #1 priority for this legislative session is to take the first step in a multi-year plan for investing in our K-12 schools, teachers, and school personnel. But really, it's an investment in our children. The most precious natural resource that God has entrusted to us are our children, and there's nothing more important than their education to set them up for success, as well as the success for the state of Louisiana collectively. Just the other day, it was reported that Louisianans are quitting their jobs at a record high rate. It's just having a negative impact on students who are choosing to enter the teaching profession. Louisiana has actually reported teacher shortages for every year since 2004. We know that fewer individuals are completing teacher preparation, and 35% of the students in school today are being taught by teachers who are either not certified or teaching outside their area of certification. Furthermore, real funding for K-12 education has actually declined across the nation and in Louisiana. I believe pay increases will help recruit talented teachers and make Louisiana more competitive relative to other SREB states and improve educational outcomes in Louisiana. Because the #1 ingredient to quality education is to have a highly professional, motivated teacher in every single classroom with our children. It is also important to me that we value the efforts of all the other individuals involved in educating those children. Whether they work in the school building as a cafeteria worker, a paraprofessional, a custodian, a secretary, or whether they drive those kids to and from school on those buses. So as such, I will be moving to raise teacher pay by $1,000 next year and school support personnel by $500. But my plan to invest in K-12 doesn't end there. It's also important that we increase funding in the classroom. According to a 2018 study by the U.S. Department of Education, 94% of teachers spend their own money on school supplies without reimbursement due to a lack of sufficient funding in the classroom. And I can tell you, being married to a public school elementary music teacher, I watch Donna every single year buy things like instruments, for example, for the kids that she was teaching. So I will also support a 1.375% increase in the MFP, our funding formula for K-12 education, provide for a greater investment in school supplies, books, smart boards, and cutting-edge technology to prepare our youth for the workforce of tomorrow. You should also know that I will once again advocate for a modest but meaningful increase to the minimum wage. You know, I say it year after year, but every year the case becomes even more compelling. $7.25 per hour is not a meaningful living wage in 2019. And as we started this year, 21 other states and the District of Columbia actually gave their workers receiving minimum wage a raise. The minimum wage in those states actually increased with the start of the year. Yet Louisiana remains one of only 5 states without a state minimum wage. And the last time the federal minimum wage was increased was actually in 2009. So Congress has made it clear that it's out of the business of raising the minimum wage, and they rely upon states to tackle this, and that's what we should do. Many states are acting. It is past time for Louisiana to join them. So I'll be advancing legislation to establish a state minimum wage at $8 per hour on January the 1st, 2020, and $8.50 per hour beginning on January 1st, 2021. Now I want you to know this legislation was modeled after our neighbor in Arkansas. Since then, Arkansas has actually passed another increase to the minimum wage, and by the way, on every single iteration of their experience with increasing the minimum wage, employment has actually gone up in Arkansas, not down. Another issue I'm going to continue to advocate for is equal pay for equal work. Louisiana has the highest wage gap by gender in the United States. That ought to offend everybody. We know that white women earn 70 cents on the dollar, women of color about 47 cents on the dollar. We've got to do better than that. My continued goal in advancing equal pay legislation is to rid the state of its status of having the largest gender wage inequity in the country, to make sure that we are paying people what they are worth, and that we don't unnecessarily trap children in poverty because we're not paying their parents what they should be paid. And we know that we have a lot of single women, especially in the state of Louisiana, who are raising children. So I'll be advancing legislation to eliminate pay secrecy by prohibiting employers from taking action against employees for inquiring about, discussing, or disclosing their wages or another employee's wages. I'm also committed to ensuring that every applicant for health insurance will be able to access coverage no matter their health status. Now, we know from the conversation all across the country and over the last several years that support for the protection for those individuals with pre-existing conditions nearly universal. We know that nearly 850,000 Louisianans actually have a pre-existing condition. But those individuals are at risk of losing critical protections if a reckless lawsuit that has been joined in by Attorney General Jeff Landry were to ultimately succeed in federal court. So we want to take action here in Louisiana to afford protections to the people here and basically preserve the status quo in terms of the protections of individuals with pre-existing conditions. Louisianans deserve to know that their health care is protected, and I look forward to working with the legislature to accomplish this goal. And in the coming weeks and months, we'll be detailing even more initiatives to include strengthening safety measures at K-12 schools, fighting against opioid addiction, reducing red tape for Louisiana businesses and professionals, spurring economic growth in low-income communities, and promoting veteran-owned businesses. And this last goal is one that I know you all have, and that is in 2019, it is my intention not to have a single special session of the legislature. That should be doable. But our budget was finally in the rearview mirror. There is nothing stopping us from making meaningful changes this year that will continue to improve the lives of all who call the great state of Louisiana home. As I mentioned before, I'm excited. I'm ready. I'm confident that this is going to be one of our best years ever. All we have to do is put Louisiana first. Now, before I take questions, I do want to mention a very tragic accident that happened just the other day, and ask everyone to pause and reflect on that tragedy that has particularly affected the community in Marksville, which is the home to 5 children who were killed in a car wreck on Friday. Certainly our hearts go out to those families. We have been in contact with that church community, and we know that Pastor Deskamp actually lost a grandchild in that accident. We know that his wife was injured and is still in the hospital in Florida, I believe. So I hope that everyone will continue to join me and Don in praying for these families and that community that has lost so much. We've been in touch with the church leaders over the weekend, and they know that there is a financial burden coming for those families. And I did want to report that a fund has been established by the Louisiana District of the United Pentecostal Church with money going to the church community in Marksville if you have the ability to donate and help these families. And my office will be sharing the link to this fund with the members of the press and the public. You know, one of the things I've always been inspired by is the generosity and goodness of the people of Louisiana to respond to their neighbors when they were in need, and I'm just asking that that happen again now for these folks up in Marshall, that we lift up our brothers and sisters in their time of need. So with that, I will take.
Somebody give me one more try.
Okay, yes, sir.
If the REC doesn't give you enough of a budget boost to pay for those teacher pay raises, would you support, I guess, tax increases or cutting funding in other areas?
We're not going to have to raise taxes. We started this year by lowering taxes by $597 million. We have the economic growth. The economy is doing better. And the reason the economists say that the forecast ought to be revised upward by somewhere between $120 to $140 million is because we have more people working, making more money, and more businesses more profitable than they had originally forecasted. That's real. That money is coming into the state of Louisiana. The only irresponsible thing to do is not take account of it and revise the forecast upward. But I will tell you, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think the REC is going to meet again on January the 17th. The revenue numbers continue to be positive and support an increase in the revenue estimate. But if the REC doesn't revise the forecast and estimate the revenue that's coming in next year, one of the very practical problems with that is not a single dollar of self-generated revenue can be incorporated into the budget. We have multiple agencies that exist entirely on self-generated revenue. You know, those unimportant things like the state police, and Office of Motor Vehicles, and DEQ, and Wildlife and Fisheries. And so it would be my hope that the political games around the REC would stop, that we would work together to move forward, revise the estimate, as has been recommended by the economists. One of them works for the legislature, the other works for the administration, and the economist who actually sits on the REC panel supports that increase as well. And you should remember also that the REC itself is a good government reform, because years ago, individuals just decided, I assume they were in the governor's office, the legislature, somebody just decided whatever the budget was going to be, and then they matched the revenue to it. We took the revenue estimating out of the hands of the governor's office specifically so we wouldn't have these types of things that took place. So I'm optimistic that come January the 17th, the REC is going to do what it's supposed to do. Yes, sir.
So as far as this federal government shutdown is concerned, obviously there's an unknown timeline as far as how long that's going to last, which could it pose a threat or could it pose a strain on state government trying to account for a lot of those losses, and or has there been a discussion at the state level as far as making up for all of it?
Yeah, well, right now we don't have tremendous difficulty being administrative on state government because of the shutdown. However, there are about 5,500 federal workers who are not being paid. Now, this is going to be a strain on them, and even though I fully anticipate that at some point, hopefully in the very near future, the government's going to be reopened, and any paychecks that they missed, they're going to get that money back. But between now and then, the mortgage comes due. Tuition checks are due. Grocery stores typically like to be paid. Those sorts of things. And so it's my hope that the shutdown will end very soon so that undue pain is not caused to these individuals who are public servants. We should remember, and they don't deserve to be caught in the crossbar. And so we're going to continue to monitor the situation. We do encourage people in Congress and the administration to sit down and have good conversations and approach this in good faith and get the government wheel. I do think it's important. Now, it is clear that if we have a protracted shutdown, there will be implications as it relates to various services. We haven't started seeing those yet, however. Yes, sir.
Has there been any kind of dramatic shift on the House Labor Committee that would make a minimum wage bill more realistic this year than it has been in the past? And have you consulted with NFIB or other people who killed it past you?
Well, we continue to work with all stakeholders and all legislators, and we know that this issue is supported by an overwhelming majority of people in Louisiana. That's true for not just the minimum wage, but also making sure we address the gender wage gap. And in fact, if you look across the country, the most conservative states have routinely voted in modest but meaningful increases in the minimum wage. So I don't believe that this is one of those issues where you have a big difference of opinion between conservatives and liberals or moderates, whatever label you might want to put on people. And so it's my hope and certainly my expectation that individuals will do what is right. You know, the case only becomes more compelling, not less, each year for an increase in the minimum wage and addressing pay equity issues. So we're going to continue to work with those individuals. I'm going to stop short of predicting what they're going to do, but just tell you that their unreasonableness on this will not deter me from doing what I believe is right for the people of Louisiana, doing what I told the people of Louisiana I was going to do when I ran for governor. I mean, it was no secret that I was going to ask for a modest but meaningful increase for the minimum wage, and that we were going to push for a fix to the gender pay equity problem. So we're going to continue to do that, and with a goal towards being successful, not just towards raising the issue. Melinda?
Governor, Louisiana is one of only 3 states with a governor's race this year, which tends to mean there's a lot of attention on our race. The Republicans nationally seem to have targeted you as an oddity of a Democrat in a deep South state. In terms of how you strategize for the campaign, are you concerned about a lot of outside money from Republican organizations flowing in and a lot of attention on this particular race?
I'm not as concerned about that as being called an oddity. There were only 3 states with races 4 years ago as well. It worked out just fine then. I think it's going to work out just fine now. It is true that there's just too much money in politics these days, and money flows from everywhere, but it's just part of the reality of the situation. I am optimistic that I'll be re-elected for precisely the reasons that I gave you earlier. Louisiana is doing better on so many critical fronts than we were 3 years ago. And while we still have our challenges, we are in a much better position to meet those challenges because we can do so from a position of strength. So I'm optimistic about the election this year. And I don't think the dynamics have changed much at all from where they were 4 years ago.
Governor?
Yes, I got a light between me and you, and I
Okay.
can see you right there.
Distribution of funds for the Restore Louisiana program were supposed to have been distributed to the homeowners who were not qualified due to the duplication of benefits issue, and being the waiver has not been signed yet by the president, that's still kind of left in just a holdup right now. What is your office doing at this point to move that forward?
Well, so Congress on October the 5th passed a bill that allows the president to issue a waiver from some duplication of benefits provisions that have been interpreted by HUD. I'm not sure that they're in the Stafford Act the way that HUD interprets them. In fact, I would argue they're not. So it allows the waiver, and it has other language in there that can help the state of Louisiana. On that same day, I submitted the waiver request to the president. And a few weeks ago, I sent a letter back to the president asking him to sign that waiver. I subsequently received a response from FEMA, which I was very happy to get. However, FEMA is not HUD, and HUD presides over the CDBG dollars. But it let me know that I can expect HUD to interpret the act soon, relatively soon. I'm believing by the end of March. Now, that's my expectation. Will come before the end of the first quarter of this calendar year, and I'm hopeful that it's going to extend relief to these homeowners who are suffering a penalty because they were approved by the Small Business Administration for a loan that they were required by FEMA to apply for. And these penalties have applied even if they only took a portion of the loan that was being offered, and that was not enough to actually repair the home based on the damages that happened. So we're looking forward to receiving that guidance. Until we receive it, we can't move forward and actually extend the assistance that we want to be able to extend to those particular homeowners. And I would tell you that the relief that comes from that could be full, it could be partial, or it could be none. But I'm hopeful that the congressional intent, which is very clear to me, will also be very clear to HUD, and that they will move forward by removing this penalty for these homeowners, so that we can then very quickly, and we're leaning forward, bring these homeowners into the Restore program and actually make this community development block grant funding available to them.
Governor, family caregiving is a top priority for AARP and the 50-plus community. As you're finalizing your legislative agenda for the year, how do you plan to address strengthening the support systems for family caregivers and their loved ones?
Well, it wasn't one of the things that I talked about, as I recall, but obviously that's a topic of conversation that I have with the folks at the Department of Health on a frequent basis. One of the things that we can do is to try to make sure that we are allocating a reasonable wage for these folks who come into the homes and care for individuals who need assistance. That has not happened in recent years because of budgetary concerns. But it's something that I know that Secretary Gee and the Department of Health is working on, that we would like to be able to move forward with, so that individuals can stay in their homes as long as possible. We know that typically that's where they prefer to be, so long as the care that they need can be provided properly in that setting. So it is something that we will be working on. Of course, the ability to do these things quite often turns upon what the revenue situation is and the funding that is allocated to the Department of Health. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, last year when you were here, you talked about implementing Medicaid work requirements, and I was wondering if you could give us an update about where your administration is with that.
Well, as you will recall, we had a bill in we had a special session, so I get a confusion. I think it was in the first special session that we actually supported. It was authored by Frank Hoffman. And at the end of the day, it was a community engagement bill that did not make it through the legislative process. But it is an approach that I supported then and support now. But specifically, the legislature told us they did not want any individual to lose Medicaid coverage because of this. And that was expressly put into the language, but they wanted social determinants of health to be addressed. And they wanted education and training, job search to be encouraged. It's still an approach that I support, but it wasn't something that we were able to get through the legislature last year. I continue to believe, however, and we should never lose sight of this, the overwhelming majority of people in the Medicaid expansion do work. if they didn't work, they would qualify for traditional Medicaid. But it's because they work that they make too much to qualify for traditional Medicaid, but they don't make enough to buy insurance, and their employers don't offer insurance. And so they were caught in this really nasty place, and they were left without insurance. The cost to provide care for someone who is uninsured is 40 cents on the dollar in Louisiana, and that comes from the general fund. The cost to give them Medicaid expansion, health insurance coverage, is no more than 10 cents on the dollar, and it comes from a statutory dedication we wouldn't have but for the fact that we expanded Medicaid. It is that cost differential that has allowed us to save more than $300 million state general fund since we expanded Medicaid in Louisiana to allow people access to life-saving care by being able to go to primary care physicians and be diagnosed with diseases and other conditions long before they get so serious that they have to go to the emergency room, which is the most costly, least effective way to treat these individuals. And in fact, it is impossible to manage disease through the emergency room. So not only have we saved more than $300 million because of Medicaid expansion, we're saving lives, and we were able to leverage $1.85 billion in federal funding that's been invested in every community across the state of Louisiana that turns over in our economy, the economic impact of which is $3.5 billion a year and 19,000 jobs that produce $100 million of state general fund revenue through the sales tax and the income tax associated with that economic activity. So while it didn't cost us any general fund on the one hand, it's producing $100 million in revenue on the other and 19,000 jobs. So for every reason that you might possibly fathom, Medicaid expansion was the right thing to do. And these are our working poor brothers and sisters in Louisiana. And the same Catholic Christian faith that tells me that being pro-life on the issue of abortion is right also tells me that Medicaid expansion is a pro-life position. Yes, ma'am.
I know last year you said that you would be open to the discussion of legalizing sports betting in Louisiana. I wondered if you've had a chance to look any more into that and what's been going on in Mississippi and how involved you will be in that discussion.
Well, first of all, I want to be in a position to actually do it in Louisiana because we know that it's happening in Mississippi. Now, the amount of additional revenue to Louisiana through sports betting is not going to be terribly significant. But where it will be helpful, it will allow our casinos to remain competitive with those in sister states, so that the rest of their gaming isn't diminished by the fact that patrons skip our casinos in order to go, for example, to Mississippi, where they can engage in sports betting. Now, at this point, the legislature has actually commissioned a study on sports betting that I haven't seen the result of it yet. In fact, I'm not even sure that it's finished, but it will inform their decision about moving forward, because there are many different ways that sports betting can be undertaken, and different states have their different models. But we're trying to figure out what works for Louisiana. But I hope that we are in a position to do that. Otherwise, I believe we will be less competitive to sister states such as Mississippi, and gaming revenue will actually decrease, and I don't think that that is in our best interest. Yes, sir.
Would you support a bill that would refund tax dollars paid to business owners who are paying a tax that is now been found unconstitutional in the state's first place?
It would depend on the circumstances. I have my Secretary of Revenue here, and the long-standing practice has always been that we do that for taxes paid under protest but not otherwise. I would be very reluctant to expand that beyond those taxes that have been paid under protest. Otherwise, I don't know where that might end. Madam Secretary, was that a good answer?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Governor.
Where is early childhood education in your list of priorities, and where do you see the future of the state without it?
Well, first of all, early childhood education is critically important. And I've already talked about it in terms of being the primary second-term initiative for the state of Louisiana. Let me tell you why. In Louisiana, we have a problem, and I think we will all acknowledge this, with educational outcomes. But the truth of the matter is, we do about as good a job as any state in educating children who show up ready to learn. We have way more than our fair share of students who show up and they're not ready to learn, and we don't catch them up. Nobody else does a really good job of catching up either. They just don't start off where we did. And so if we want to really make a tremendous difference in the lives of these children, but also for the state as a whole, and we want to make sure that we reduce those gaps in educational performance relative to wealth and race and other states, we will do something around early childhood education. We can start by trying to address the backlog of students who are on a waiting list to actually get into quality daycare, but it's much more than that. Before the session starts next year, I will receive a report from a commission that I created to study early childhood education that's going to identify the steps that we need to take both in the short term but also in the longer term. And we're going to have to do this. If we're serious about education in Louisiana, this is just something that we're going to have to do. We cannot wait till kindergarten any longer. When a child starts kindergarten and they have a vocabulary deficit in the thousands of words, no one has taken the time or made the effort to read to them so that they learn words and shapes and colors and various concepts. It makes a difference for that child over his or her lifetime. We have to do better. Early childhood is the answer. And we have different silos of funding now that could be put to better use, but we probably shouldn't pretend that that alone will fix it. And so it's going to have to be a comprehensive plan. And it's sort of strange that you asked the question shortly after I was asked about the sports betting, because I know that there are some individuals who are going to try to capture whatever that incremental increase in gaming revenue, if it's sports betting, and tie it to early childhood education so that we have a dedicated source of funds. Generally speaking, we have too many dedications, not too few. We don't have enough discretion. However, I support early childhood education initiatives enough that that is a conversation that I'm willing to have.
Thank you, Governor.
Yes, sir.
Governor, there's some lawmakers already said that it's because of the potential surpluses that are being projected, they'd like to roll back the sales tax a little faster than it's set up for in the law that was passed this year or last year. What's your feelings about that?
Well, look, we have the sales tax component, and I think this is significant. That component of our revenue stream is not coming in ahead of the forecast. It is the individual income, the corporate income that's coming in ahead of the forecast. Number two is when we have the surplus, in fact, we didn't know what it was at the time. We know now. We closed last year with a surplus of $300 million. The first thing we did was reduce taxes by $600 million for the current year. We are still running ahead of the revenue forecast precisely because more people are working, making more money, and more businesses are more profitable than the economists had originally predicted. Those are all good things. And traditional conservative thought around this is you grow the economy and you use that revenue in order to pay for critical services. So the idea that we're finally have the highest GDP in our state's history and we're doing so much better economically that we would say, well, now is the time to get rid of the surplus so that we can't do the things that are essential to funding education, to funding health care and so forth. I take issue with that. But secondly, some of the folks who say that are in complete disagreement with other folks who don't believe that the surplus is real. They don't want to recognize the additional revenue coming in at REC, so which is it? That was a rhetorical question. Yes, ma'am.
On Patricia Smith's voting rights bill, the felon voting rights bill, when it was discussed during the session, there was a pool of voters that were deemed likely to be eligible to vote under the legislation that was around 3,000 or so, 3,500, and now it looks like it could be up to 35,000 or so. I guess I'm wondering if you are supportive of the legislation, knowing that the numbers are much larger than might have originally been thought, and kind of where you stand on that.
Well, first of all, I haven't heard a number like 35,000. For me, the most essential thing is the policy that was embedded in the legislation, the categories of offenders who would have their voting rights restored after 5 years of leaving confinement. If the policy is right, what difference does it make about the numbers? The numbers are what they are. But you know, it's a conversation that I know that we're going to be engaging in, and I think March 1st is the effective date of that particular piece of legislation. I don't know that we're going to have any real issues there, but I will engage. In fact, I have some meetings with the Secretary of State, one of which is tomorrow, to discuss a few different issues, and this may actually come up at that time. Yes, sir.
Tariffs, are they really hurting? You indicated that it's you blamed that the tariff on the farm products for hurting the VA's last income report. You know, is there any sign of give there? Or is that going to start to hurt more as we drift along?
Well, there's no doubt it will hurt more as we drift along. Now, I think the sign of hope is that we have started, I think, a 90-day period where the tariffs actually increased. So China and the United States have renewed discussions, negotiations over this. I think that both countries have a mutual interest in resolving the disputes in the short term. And so I'm optimistic that that's going to happen. But you should remember that last July, Bloomberg put out a report. It said of all 50 states, Louisiana stood to lose the most from a protracted trade war with tariffs and retaliatory tariffs, precisely because of the business that we get through our ports, which is the largest port complex in the world. If you start right here in Mississippi, I'm sorry, in Baton Rouge, and go down the Mississippi River all the way to Plaquemines, especially with the importation of steel and aluminum being so important. 60% of the grain exported by our country goes through the very same ports. And the market for the grain was severely compromised when China stopped buying soybeans. So what happened was we had farmers all across the state of Louisiana this year who didn't even harvest their soybeans because there wasn't a market for them. In previous years, soybeans, even at the quality that they were, which wasn't optimal, there's always been a market for them somewhere, just maybe at a reduced price. This year couldn't do anything with it. So there's no doubt in my mind that we're starting to feel the impact from the tariffs. That is why in July I wrote a letter to the president encouraging him to successfully but quickly wrap up those negotiations so that we didn't have this type of harm to our economy and to the people in Louisiana who depend upon these things. You know, for example, since 2012, and my numbers may be off slightly, we've had about $180 billion of capital investment announced in Louisiana to construct chemical and petrochemical plants. About half of that is either complete or underway. The other half, the final investment decision, is yet to come. And overnight, because of these tariffs, we're seeing the construction costs of these facilities go up 20 or 25%. That is not in our best interest because there are thousands and thousands of construction jobs and thousands of permanent jobs, both direct and indirect, that are dependent upon these projects coming to fruition. So I'm in the same place as I was in July when I wrote the letter. I'm in the same place as I was when I visited with the president in New Jersey to discuss criminal justice reform, and I happened to take that opportunity to mention this issue to him as well, is I really want him to be successful. I think it's important to have fair trade, but it's also important that we get through this period of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs so that we can have the certainty that we need and that we can have a market for our products. There's no doubt that they started to have an impact in our state over the last few months. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, one of your policies early in this term was to say, we're not going to have automatic exemptions from taxes for jobs, and we're going to give it back to local government to see how that's going to work. How do you think it's played out?
I think it's actually working very well, and you're specifically talking about the industrial tax exemption program. So we had a situation in Louisiana where for years, manufacturers could get 100% of their property taxes exempted for 10 years. And even though 100% of the property taxes that would otherwise be paid and collected would go to local government had no seat at the table. And so what I did is I gave them a seat at the table to make sure that they would have to sign off approving it. And currently, rather than 100% for 10 years, it's 80% for two 5-year terms, and the 5-year terms are independent of one another. But at least in year one, those taxpayers would actually start paying some property tax to the local government because their operation create demands on that local government the first year, whether it's in terms of education or infrastructure or public safety, for example. So I think it's working well, and we know we have not seen a reduction in the total value of projects that are being applied for with respect to the ITEP, but we no longer allow miscellaneous capital additions, those relatively small things that they are going to do in those plants regardless, to qualify for the ITEP. And most significant, you cannot justify an exemption from taxation that is that large independent from jobs. There was no jobs requirement at all with the ITEP program until we put one on there. And so I think the program now strikes the right balance between the state and the local entities, but it also strikes the right balance by requiring jobs. And so it also, I think, it's in a better position with respect to those manufacturers having the certainty that they need around the program to know how to score it when they're comparing Louisiana versus other states for potential investment. And we continue to see record investments in Louisiana across the board from, in fact, foreign direct investment in Louisiana on a per capita basis is the highest in the nation. So I think we're in about the right place with ITEP today. And I feel like everything we do is government. You're trying to strike the right balance between competing interests. And I believe we're in a much better place than we were.
I think we have one more.
Yes, Robert.
Sure. Governor, on your teacher pay raise, tell us exactly how you want that $1,000 applied, whether that's an average or everybody gets one. And then if you get the legislature to approve this, either through the MFP or an appropriation, how can you assure those legislators that the money is actually going to get to the teachers and isn't going to get intercepted by the districts as it goes through?
That's a good question, and the last part of the question first. I think the better way to do this is to put it in the MFP, and the MFP is constructed in such a way that if we put the raises in level 3, that's the only permissible use of that funding by the school district. So my proposal specifically with respect to teachers, and teachers includes all certificated personnel. So you may have a school nurse, you may have a counselor, for example. That's $1,000 per teacher in level 3 of the MFP. That's $72.2 million. With respect to support workers, $500, and as I mentioned earlier, these are secretaries, custodians, lunchroom workers, school bus drivers, and so forth, $500 each. Also in level 3, that's $25 million. And on top of that, going to the school districts in level 1 of the MFP would be a 1.375% increase that basically operates as a block grant. We haven't done this in many years, as you know. For many years, Louisiana worked towards giving a 2.75% increase into the MFP every single year, half of which had to go to teacher pay. But that's not been the practice for a number of years, and that's principally the reason why teacher pay has fallen so much relative to the Southern Regional average. 10 years ago, we were at the average. Today, we're $2,200 below it. But by putting this funding inside the MFP, the block grant portion in level 1, the raises in level 3, they have to go where they were intended. And the legislature has been dealing with the MFP long enough that I think there will be a comfort level with doing it in this way. And that's why I'm working with the Superintendent of Education and the Bessie Board and the legislature to make sure that we address this through the MFP. Okay, so the hook is coming up. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I hope that you will share my optimism for the great state of Louisiana. I believe there are wonderful things to come if only we will work together in a bipartisan fashion and continue to put Louisiana first. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. Our guest next week actually is we have the Lieutenant Governor, Bill Inesser, will be joining us, so I hope you all can make it out to that event as well.
Good to see you, man.